Hello everyone and welcome to today's installment of Beyond the Mask. Today we'll be discussing the history of the most famous family to emerge from the Scream universe, the Loomis family. Currently standing, the Loomis family are one of the most infamous additions to the Scream franchise. Their impact on this specific story has spun over 3 generations, with the current reputation of the family being somewhat well known by most of the people who appear throughout all 6 movies. Dating back to the early days of Hank and Nancy Loomis, there is a lot of history from this family that is somewhat unexplored. The overarching impact this family has had on this story is something that is often overlooked, in my opinion. Their impact initially rippled through Sidney Prescott's life from 1995 onwards, and it doesn't stop there. Sam Carpenter, who is a descendant of the Loomis family, is also facing her own internal struggles with accepting that she is in fact part of this family, whose story is somewhat unknown by almost everybody in the movies. But who are they really? Was it really old-fashioned revenge that turned Nancy Loomis into a serial killer? Whatever became of Hank Loomis following his son's reveal? Join me today as I take a deep dive into the backstory and lives of the entire Loomis family. Hank Loomis. Starting off the family tree, we have Henry aka Hank Loomis, Billy's paternal father and grandfather to Sam Carpenter. Surprisingly, Hank wasn't originally a resident of Woodsboro. His main residency was in LA, long before he met Nancy Loomis. Unbeknownst to most, Hank was a very well respected lawyer, so well respected that he managed to land major jobs for various big time companies. One of his employers was in fact Sunrise Studios, the same company who went on to produce the first 3 Stab movies. Around 1971, a scandal rocked Sunrise Studios which prompted its legal team to quickly intervene and squash the story. It was following this incident that led to Hank Loomis' relocation to a smaller town in California, Woodsboro. It is currently unknown when Hank and Nancy specifically met, or what the story is behind how they became to be an item. What we do know though, is that by 1979, the pair had welcomed their first and only child in the form of their son, Billy Loomis. Judging by Hank's former success at his job as a lawyer in LA, it's widely accepted that he continued his occupation in Woodsboro following his relocation. Despite clearly making misjudgment throughout his life, Hank appeared to be what some would deem as a normal dad towards his son Billy. He expressed genuine concern for his son's involvement in the Woodsboro murders, which took place in 1996, and he continued to care and provide a home for his son despite his mother's absence. Nancy Loomis, formerly married to Hank, is Nancy Loomis. Little is known about Nancy's life before she married Hank. What is known though is that she held a seemingly normal household, playing the role as Hank's wife and Billy's mother. Before the destruction of her marriage to Hank, her biggest accomplishment was a relationship with her son Billy. Billy doted on Nancy, which is why the family dynamic being turned on its head had a massively negative impact on him specifically. It was mentioned that Nancy was somewhat stereotypical in her appearance of a suburban mother, and despite the outward presentation of this happy family, things weren't quite what they seemed, as in 1995, the marriage of Hank and Nancy would fall apart, with devastating consequences. Deluded in her thinking, Nancy served all of the blame for her failed marriage towards Hank's mistress, and none levelled at the complications that may have been occurring in her marriage to Hank. It's possible, however, that Nancy did go through a period of self-loathing as she went on a road of self-discovery following her divorce from Hank, losing weight and changing her appearance, likely so that she'd never be cheated on again. Despite this, she cared very little for her former life, especially for the consequences her departure from Woodsboro would have on her son Billy. Billy Loomis. When Billy is introduced in the original Scream movie, he's presented as a typical high school boyfriend of Sidney Prescott. What the audience and Sidney herself are unaware of is the deep-rooted darkness that motivates most of his actions. As stated previously, Billy had an extremely positive relationship with his mother, so the collapse of his parents' relationship hit him hard, especially as his mother refused to face her marital problems head-on and opted to depart Woodsboro, leaving her teenage son behind with his father, Hank. What was unclear to Billy in the early stages of his parents' divorce was what went on between them, or more specifically, what drove his mother to leave. At this time in 1995, Billy was already heavily into his relationship with Sydney. He had dated her for several months, with their relationship seemingly thriving ahead positively for the pair. It was only after his mother's departure from Woodsboro that things began to collapse. The pair were considered the perfect couple, with many students being envious of the relationship the pair had. Billy, however, was extremely clever at playing his cards close to his chest. Sydney knew very little about what had happened between Mr. and Mrs. Loomis, with Billy sharing little to no detail about what specifically went on at home. Not even his best friend, Stu Marker, was aware of the full story behind the breakdown of the Loomis family. Specifics on what happened between Hank and Nancy are still unclear to the audience. Was there issues from Nancy herself that caused Hank to engage in an affair behind her back? Did Nancy display psychotic tendencies that led to Hank's infidelity? Or simply put, was Hank just bored of the relationship and decided to commit adultery? The key element missing from the backstory of the Loomis family is in fact Maureen Prescott, Sydney's mother and former Sunrise Studio actress. It's unclear how history shaped the events that would follow, but it was Maureen's involvement with Frank that would go on to play a huge part in the ongoing devastating events that would follow in the story. It's possible the pair had history from their time in LA, as Hank was working for Sunrise Studios around the time that Maureen, under the alias of Rena Reynolds, was also working as an actress for the same studio. It's alluded to that her case was covered up by the studio and the lawyer involved, and the same lawyer that walked away from the studio following this was Hank Loomis. Specifics are unclear, but perhaps knowledge of what really happened to Maureen prompted Hank to walk away. Maureen left a devastating trail behind her following her return to Woodsboro from LA, a trail that was picked up by her son, Roman Bridger, who was a result of her sexual assault during her time in LA. Roman's arrival in Woodsboro brought Maureen a lot of old heartache back to the surface once again, and so she decided to reject this aspect of her life, or rather reject the son, who she deemed a product of the assault itself. Unbeknownst to Maureen, her son had grown to become bitter and angry at his abandonment in a similar yet twisted manner to Billy. Roman began stalking Maureen through her day-to-day life and discovered the shocking secrets of her life, one being her affair with Hank Loomis. It was here that Roman hatched the perfect plan. He informed Billy of the reason behind his parents' separation, or more specifically, the reason why his mother was no longer around. That decision would go on to shape the future. Deluded in their own rage and resentment, Roman and Billy orchestrated the murder of Maureen as punishment for her past secrets and the impact they had on them. With Billy being somewhat of a popular figure amongst the students of Woodsboro High, the admiration he received from various students all but added to his popularity. Despite his hidden tendencies, he was charming and somewhat seductive with his words. This made it easy for him to manipulate Stu Marker to help him in the scheme of murdering Maureen. Following Maureen's death, Billy sat dormant for a year as he continued to get close to Sydney, who was grief-stricken following her mother's murder. His lust for bloodshed knew no bounds, however, and so Billy constructed a plan to extend his revenge against Maureen towards her own daughter. As many of you likely already know, this further plan for revenge led to a sadistic and well-publicised killing spree, with Billy and his accomplice Stu taking it upon themselves to target Maureen's daughter, but also immortalise themselves in the public eye, through the inclusion of including horror-based tropes into their murders. As we know, Billy was eventually killed by Sydney herself, and revealed to be the culprit behind her mother's death 1 year prior. The news sent shockwaves through Woodsboro, and likely traumatised Hank. Despite his appreciation and best efforts to raise Billy, he clearly was unaware of the true nature that was hidden behind closed doors. It's likely he moved away from Woodsboro, as Hank wasn't unfamiliar with relocation. The news of Billy's death may have hit Hank hard, however it was Nancy Loomis who was hit the hardest by the events of Woodsboro in 1995 to 1996. It became a public agreement that Billy likely ended up the way he did because of his mother's swift departure from his life. True to her nature, Nancy didn't blame herself for her son's actions, instead levelling the blame towards Maureen and her daughter Sydney. This resulted in Nancy orchestrating her own revenge against Sydney by means of stalking her as she begun her life at Windsor College. Just like her own son though, Nancy was eventually stopped by Sydney herself and thus ended the reign of terror the family had forced upon her. The Loomis line appeared to have ended with Billy, but it turned out that this wasn't the case. During the time between 1995 and 1996, Billy used his popularity to engage in sexual encounters with various girls behind Sydney's back. One of these happened to be Christina Carpenter. Following liaisons between the pair, Christina found herself pregnant and eventually gave birth to a daughter, Sam Carpenter. Sam Carpenter is the only child of Billy Loomis and the firstborn child of Christina Carpenter. Christina already being involved with someone during her liaisons with Billy made the situation all the more complicated. Following the discovery of Billy being a serial killer, and an infamous one at that, Christina opted to pretend her expected child was actually that of her boyfriend. The pair would go on to marry, leading to Samantha being raised in a typical happy suburban family home. In 2010, however, the curse of the Loomis family began to take effect on the Carpenters, as Sam discovered Billy was her true father. Revealing this secret resulted in the collapse of this happy family home, and begun a journey of complete self-discovery for Samantha, as the knowledge of who or what her father was led her to fall apart, both mentally and emotionally. As soon as it became known that Samantha was a descendant of the Loomis family, it seemingly created a target on her back, as the story of her father's antics had become a worldwide phenomenon at this point, with books, a movie franchise and more being centered around the story. Sam, similar to her grandmother before her, decided to leave Woodsboro as her antics reached their peak, and thus she attempted to start a new life where no one would know her real identity. Unfortunately for Sam, this was one family secret that she simply wouldn't be able to avoid. Her own mental health continued to be an issue for Sam, as she began to question the similarities in herself in comparison to her own father. The exact origin of how Sam begun on this path is currently unknown. However, it's alluded to that she senses a darkness inside of her, a darkness she fears could manifest in a similar way that it did with Billy. The story behind the Loomis family in the Scream universe plays into the belief that being a killer and having internal conflict between right and wrong is likely hereditary, something that is often disputed by psychologists. Nevertheless, it's unsure why this family currently has 3 generations of internal darkness presented in their characterization. Could it be that Nancy and Billy could have fought their desire to kill, had they had someone who loved them enough to stomp out the negativity that shrouded their minds? That's an interesting question, something I believe we are definitely witnessing happen in the movies today. What do you guys think? Did I miss any details out? As usual, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome Scream content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.